So I'd like to introduce our speaker this afternoon, Dr. Joe Kieper. And he is the Chief Executive Officer?
Head paper pusher.
Head paper pusher at the Virginia Museum of Natural History. And he's been a real supporter of the Historical Society. In fact, he was on our board and was president for a while. So we appreciate him coming. If you want to tell them any more about your background, I know they'd find it interesting.
Okay, thanks, Virginia. Alrighty, well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. Actually, with the stints that I served on the board, including as board president, I've never actually given a talk here that I can remember, right? Is there anything I'm forgetting that you can remember? I mean, probably not. But anyway, yeah, so I've been here at the Natural History Museum. It's my day job for over 13 years now. It's the longest I've ever done anything in my life. And so really done a lot to adopt Martinsville as my home. I imported a wife from Abingdon, Virginia, so she's there in the second row, I count. So it's been a really good museum experience here. Martinsville is so it's got a wealth of riches from the museum standpoint. Both us and Piedmont Arts are nationally accredited through the American Alliance Museum. This museum got started with federal funds and so forth, so it's federally recognized and whatnot. And Bassett Historical Society and Fahey are, great area assets and so forth. So, I mean, just right here, within a few miles radius of this city, we have just a great abundance of resources. I guess not.
There we go.
Ooh, oh, wow.
Okay.
Okay, I'll just talk like this. I sounded real loud in my head. All right, so I've been here for 13 years, but many of you have had the pleasure of watching the long-term evolution of the Virginia Museum of Natural History. Of course, it had its start over in the building on Douglas Avenue, 1001 Douglas Avenue, whereby it evolved into the new building in 2007. And so actually this month, that building is now 16 years old. Right? Do I have the math right? I think I do. And so we can't call it the new building anymore, maybe newer, but it's been a great facility. It really has done a lot for us. And even though I never saw the Virginia Museum of Natural History in action at the Douglas Avenue building, I could really see what the community, what the staff and the leadership and the boards did over the years and the good that they really did at the old Douglas Avenue building. Because that wasn't built as a museum. As you all know, that was the old elementary school. And they kind of shoehorned a museum into it. And to say that probably gives them short shrift. They really did a remarkable job establishing a world-class natural history museum in a building that wasn't purpose-built. So what I thought I would do today is talk a bit about the history. Now, my one disclaimer, I'm not going to talk about a full history of the museum. I'm going to be talking more about the science and the science that was done here in Martinsville, Henry County, but I can't cover everything. It's going to be much too large of a presentation. When you factor in educational efforts in STEM and engineering, when you factor in medical and industrial and conservation-oriented research and science that has originated right here in Martinsville, Henry County, this presentation I give today would grow by leaps and bounds. So it's going to be kind of a cross-section of work primarily relating to the Virginia Museum of Natural History. Now, the museum, of course, does not really need much of an introduction. You all have participated in programs over there, public events and so forth, right? So it's been a great facility. We've done a lot with it. We're growing. We're actually almost outgrowing our building. We have Reptile Fest on April 21st and 22nd. Hope you come out and participate. With these festivals that we're throwing, we now, in many cases, have to close off the parking lot and literally set up tents to create outdoor presentation areas. So we've been doing that for several of these programs and so forth. And so we're really, at least on special days, we're outgrowing the size of our building. But it has served us very well. We have a strong education department. They do outreach in the community. They do outreach around the state using electronic resources, like you see Terry there on the left. And we, of course, absorb children into our classrooms and so forth, where you see Christy, our education manager, there on the right. But really, our research and collections is the foundation of everything that we do. And so I have 1984, 1988 was kind of this nebulous time in the history of the museum where it started out as the Noel Boaz Foundation and then eventually evolved into the Virginia Museum of Natural History Foundation, eventually leading to the purchase of the Douglas Avenue building, and then the museum eventually becoming a state agency in 1988. And so to date, in 2023, we use kind of a round number of about 10 million inventoried specimens and artifacts that we have behind the scenes. And it's just an amazing array of specimens and artifacts that we have at our disposal here. And here's just a few example photos. This is the entomology collection, hundreds of thousands of prepared specimens in the back of house here. And Virginia is such a great place to have a natural history museum. This is the traditional physiographic map of Virginia showing the 5 regions, starting with the coastal plain to your right, leading all the way out to the Appalachian Plateau. And this diversity of the geology and geography really leads to the idea of having really varied science. And we have 3 mechanisms in which we grow our collections. The first is we have the research that is done by the staff day to day. They do that out in the field. We also have orphaned collections. That would be universities. Collections don't pay tuition, so universities are frequently unloading collections. And it's not just, believe it or not, it's not just today's universities, it's also other museums. There are museums around the country that are slowly transforming themselves into science centers, exhibit only. It's not that a science center is bad, but it is abandoning the collections that make museums special. In fact, I'm right now working with the Kentucky Science Center outside of Louisville, if I remember right. Well, actually in Louisville, Kentucky, and because that's a neighboring state, I'm working with them to help them deaccession their full range of collections, some of which are not appropriate for our museum, but we're basically going to be first in line. So we're going to have another growth in our collections. It's going to be a growth spurt because of an orphan collection. And lastly, donation by private donors. So to start, the idea of the field work here. So here on the left is Dr. Cal Ivanov. I'll get back to him later. To his left is Liberty Hightower. She's one of our research technicians. This is done in the Shenandoah National Park, and they collected insects, soil-dwelling biota, shortly after a massive forest fire over there. When I say massive, I'm not talking the scale of western United States. We lose, millions of acres to forest fire out in the west. But this was something like, if I remember right, about a 10,000 acre burn, which in the eastern United States, where we have a lot more moisture, is very significant. So they got into the place, you can see that tree right there is scorched. They got into places just as the vegetation was recovering and collected insects to show that recovery of biodiversity after fire. Very unique experience. And Liberty, boy, I tell you, it's amazing to have people like her, because once you go and do this field collection, you've got to sort through all the material that you collected back in the laboratory, and that's a lot of what she does. And this is how these collections grow. So here's an example of an ant colony that they uncovered, and so you would collect a sampling of those specimens there at their field sites, and then Liberty gets to sort through them and turn them into proper long-term collections. Right? We can go back in time and see a similar process. Did anyone recognize the guy on the right? Come on, I know some of you know this guy. You've met him. Bob, you want to take a stab?
The dinosaur guy.
Yeah, the dinosaur guy, right, from back in the day, right? So this is Nick Frazier. He was one of the early scientists recruited by the Virginia Museum of Natural History. He's at the Solite Quarry here, which is the quarry that we'll get back to in our conversation this afternoon. And, Nick did a great job. He did work with dinosaurs and a lot of other things. We're going to come back to his work and so forth, but he grew the collections, and it's just a great example of what has been done, year after year, decade after decade. This is an example of some of the fossils that he collected. So on the left, we have a fossil water bug, and on the right, we have its modern analog, right? So we can actually see some beautiful details in this field site that Nick worked in. We actually continued with that site for many years. In fact, back in 2015, the quarry, this is the Solite Quarry right near Cascade, Virginia, about 20, 30 minutes from here. In this quarry, where we have this insect layer and fossil layer, the quarry owners basically had said, hey guys, sorry, we can't give you access anymore. We're going to blast this area because we need the material. We're like, so we got a year. And I personally spent about 30 Saturdays in that quarry removing the rock that contains the fossils, boxing it up, and moving it to our old Douglas Avenue facility, which we now are renovating so it can be a long-term storage facility. We have about 125 boxes of who knows what in there, lifetimes of work. And that is available there. One of the most satisfying things I got to participate in. So the Solite Quarry, we have a lot of history. This is a unique fossil here. This is actually a possible coelacanth or a fish. This is the tail, some jumbled bones here in the middle, and the head right here. And the preservation, even though that one, you have to use a little imagination to try to picture what that fish looked like. But the level of preservation is amazing, and it was work in that field site over many decades that grew our fossil collections. This is the more famous one. This is Mecystotracheus, the gliding reptile, right? So Nick Frazier found the first 2 fossils of this species. This is the head right here. The neck kind of goes around. These are the backbones right here. And you can't see it here, but there is a pelvis in there. And then these long ribs are similar to what we call, today there's a genus of lizard called Draco that actually expands its ribs into a gliding mechanism. It can go tree to tree. So during our salvage of the Solite Quarry, we found 2 more of those, both by the same person. I thought that person ought to play the lottery because these are extremely rare, right? Another collection that I'll just point out here is our nest egg collection. It's historic. Back in the day, go to the 17, 18, 1900s, people collected nest and egg sets as sort of like a prestige thing, But then families ended up donating them to us. So these came mainly from private collections and some university collections, but you don't see nest egg sets in museums very often. This is another this was an orphan collection. Shenandoah University gave us a bunch of fossil material from out west. And so this is actually, we've had it on display, maybe you've seen this before, but this is a triceratops horn. The nasal horn comes off the front of that animal. And what you'll notice here, right here and here and here, those are bite marks. And those are bite marks, and they line up well with the size of a jaw of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. And so not only that, but they x-rayed this thing. And what happens if you break your bone and you get an x-ray of the healed bone, what will the x-ray show you where the bone mended?
A scar.
Not a scar, but you're close. You're on the right track. It's not necessarily a scar, but the bone density there where the knitting occurred will be denser. And so that shows healing. When they x-rayed this bone here, this nasal horn, those areas where the bite marks occurred are more dense. So in other words, this is the only evidence on the planet Earth that T-Rex actually attacked a living Triceratops. The Triceratops lived to fight another day, I guess, and those scars healed. Right? So these are the stories that we get to tell. But at the same time too, Shenandoah University, we're really lucky they reached out to us and we were able to accept it, but otherwise, and we've seen it happen, collections end up going in the garbage, right? This is some of our bird study skins. We don't really make these anymore. We only do this on an occasion where rare bird species might become roadkill, gets killed in an accident or something. And but back in the day, people collected these things, and it's a really unique resource. So again, while we don't do this anymore, if you look closely, these are all common yellowthroats, a warbler that we'll be seeing here in another month or so. If we look closely, right, look at the dates of collection. I don't know if you can see all the way back there. This was July 30th, 1900, June 10th, 1901. August 14th, 1900. These provide a historical look at species, and a lot of the collections that we got back when this museum started in the 80s, the collections came from UVA, VCU, Virginia Tech, a variety of other universities, and they started out quite old, and we're now holding them in the public trust for people to use over time. Private collections, these are some ducks that were basically going to get bulldozed. It was a dilapidated property, a fella had died. The nephew was like, I don't know what to do with this stuff. So it was up in Fairfax. I jumped in a truck. I went up and got them. And they're actually really lovely. They're wonderful taxidermied specimens. So that's an example of private collections. Private collections get really weird. This is some guy's house. up in Pennsylvania, right? We went up there, we got a lot of this stuff, right? I mean, it was just an amazing experience. We had 2 moving trucks and a big van, and we still couldn't fit everything. We actually had to move one of the moving trucks to a climate-controlled self-storage area, stuff everything in there, and then some months later go back and recover it. But basically the family wanted to get rid of this stuff, and it's hard to do. It's hard to do. You put this stuff on auction, it's not going to go anywhere. First of all, if you do sell, it'll be pennies on the dollar. The second thing is that it's not going to move. A lot of people just don't want taxidermy anymore. So we actually talked to the family and said, get the assessed value, donate it to us, and we'll give you a letter, and that will help you with your estate taxes as you settle on your brother's property. And that worked out better for the family, and it worked out great for us. I had to type 1 letter, so it worked like a charm. And here they are. Here's the museum team hauling a Nile crocodile into the front door of the museum. And so, but I'm going to now move into where I want to talk about the staff over time and what they've done. Excuse me, I'm not being rude, just want to make sure I check the time. Right? This is a friend of mine. And this guy, he works on a very particular group of insects called snail-killing flies, and he lives in Indiana, and he's been doing these geographic kind of documentations of their distribution and abundance. So he came and visited the museum and spent a couple of days going through our material, and he eventually published a large monograph called The Snail-Killing Flies of the Delmarva Peninsula. And so it's not just our staff, it is so many colleagues that come and visit the museum and people that literally contact us to borrow specimens and artifacts, which we do loan out. So where does this start? Who recognize, oh, I got the name up there. So just squint, not look at the name right now, all right? So I should have made this quiz time. I didn't even think about it. That would have been fun. But here you all know Dr. Noel Boaz, the founding director of the Virginia Museum of Natural History. He's also the director of paleoanthropology here. And so we even have the old logo. What was the old logo inspired by?
Sloth?
Yes. What kind of sloth?
A ground sloth.
Yes, the giant ground sloth. So that when you go into the museum now and you got Claude, the giant ground sloth, greeting everyone, right? In nature, they'll often be on all fours like that. So that was the old logo back in the day. But he got the museum started. And at the same time, too, which is incredible to me, he kept an active research program. So this was the first publication coming out of the Virginia Museum of Natural History, Evolution of Environments in the Hominidae in the African Western Rift Valley, right? So this came out in 1990, publication number 1. Since then, dozens and dozens of publications, memoirs, and Jeffersoniana, and a variety of other things have come out documenting the scientific work of our staff. The last one we published was just as the pandemic got underway. It was Scorpion Flies and Relatives of Virginia by Dr. Ollie Flint, who is one of our former trustees. And so we look forward to kind of re-energizing that now that we're kind of moving out of the pandemic era. Right? So when you look at some of the staff and so forth and research associates, these are some examples of their work in the Semliki region, which is on the west of Kenya, next to the Democratic Republic of Congo, used to be known as Zaire. So Noel, of course, was an author in a number of the papers in this memoir, but Ray Bernard, just another tip of the hat to these people who work with us. He's a professor at Howard University. He is in the process of retiring, although it's been taking at least 2 years so far for that process to happen. But Ray has actually already bought a house here in Martinsville. He fully intends to, when he is fully retired, to come down here full-time and continue work on a voluntary basis at the museum. And Noel actually continues a history of science here in Martinsville, Henry County. He's director of the Integrative Center for Science and Medicine, which its motto is understanding the hominidae for humans. So he's turned those stories into, say, evolutionary health stories and so forth. So he really did a great job. And if we stay kind of back in the historical nature of the museum, going back to about 1990 or so, that's when Richard Hoffman joined the museum. Richard was one of our curators, and he died in 2011, unfortunately. But I'll tell you, I started here in 2010. When I saw the job advertisement for this position here at the museum, I said, man, that's the museum that Richard Hoffman works at. Right? I studied his papers as a graduate student, right? It was awesome. So I was like, wouldn't that be cool? And look what happened. And so I was so happy that for about 1.5 years I got to work with him a little bit. And actually, the picture on the left there is a field trip we took together up to Grassy Fork in the southern part of Franklin County. And one thing that really stuck with me that he said is he doesn't know of another museum that has done more with the first 25 years of its history than VMNH has done. And when you look at those, that was a while ago, we're 35 years old now, but for those first 25 years and the massive growth of collections through private collections, through research and collections, through orphan collections, right? It really is an amazing legacy. So here's Richard kind of back in his younger days there on the left, and there's Richard in the Hall of Ancient Life shortly after the new museum building opened, and he left quite a legacy training a lot of people in the ways of entomology. One thing that I think Richard exemplifies is a person of many hats, right? When we look at sciences today, most scientists become extremely specialized. They focus on one narrow area. When you work in a museum with a relatively small staff, right now we've got 15 people back in research and collection. That's the biggest our research and collection staff has ever been since I've been at the museum. So we have a lot more going on now than we did just a decade ago. But Richard, and this is him here, right? That's him with his head in a bucket, right? So what they did back, they still do this today, they take buckets and they cut them out in blue plexiglass at the bottom. He's looking for freshwater mussels in amongst the riffle rocks, right? So they would spend hours with their heads down in buckets. And that's Steve Robley. He's with the Department of Conservation and Recreation. And he's done a lot of work for the museum and has grown our collection as well. But Richard, if you look at this kind of just laundry list of things, right, he was an expert in beetles, so he was a member of the Virginia Beetle Project and added thousands and thousands of beetles to our collection. He also worked with a couple of other colleagues to study the stoneflies of Virginia, some of these insects that fly fishermen will tie their flies to mimic. True bugs or the Heteroptera, he's discovered new species right here in the Commonwealth over the years. He even has a publication on salamanders, up and down their inferior vertebrate animals. I don't know how he did it, right? You know, I mean, I'm a bug guy by nature myself. I don't like to study those things that are contaminated by backbones. But he did it. He has a publication on salamanders. In fact, a salamander is named after him that is found up in the Shenandoah National Park. And he even, in his spare time, he would talk about, you know, about how on Sundays he'd go for drives when mountain laurel and rhododendron were blooming. He was looking at various, he said that he was sure that there was some kind of geographic pattern to their distribution and abundance. There was sort of like a cutoff. He never really explained it to me, but he was sitting there, he'd drive around in his little red convertible and he'd make maps showing where rhododendron versus mountain laurel would occur. But millipedes, these thousand-leggers, that was the group that he was most widely known for. In fact, right about the time of his death, he described this species, Samodesmus bryophorus, from South America. He was worldwide in the scope. He described new species to science, again, from right here in Virginia, but he did that throughout the world. And what was really interesting about this particular species, one of the last ones he got to publish on, was that this one is the only millipede known to have colonies of mosses growing on its back, which actually aided in the camouflage of the animal. So they documented 3 different species of moss growing dorsally. This millipede is about, about an 1.5 inches long or so, and just a fascinating story that he was able to tell. So really admired Richard, and I'm so grateful, even though it was a long time, that I had that time to spend with him. We actually kind of continue that tradition. So here I'm going to change gears a little bit, try to weave a couple stories together. Fellow on the left has been working at the museum since right about pandemic started. Jackson Means graduated from Virginia Tech, and he's a millipede guy. He's continuing Richard's legacy by continuing to study millipedes, but what he brings to the table is modern approaches using genetic material. So he doesn't just look at morphology or anatomy of the creatures that he studies, but he also looks at the genes, and they can tell a very important story, which is great because over here on the right, Dr. Nancy Moncrief, she's been using genes forever, but with Jackson just coming out of school, we modernized our molecular biology lab during pandemic. While we were kind of down, we weren't accepting people into the building, we made good use of our time, and so we modernized and invested in that lab, and now they're doing tremendous work. Jackson on millipedes and other organisms for that matter, but Nancy on a lot of the vertebrate animals. She's the curator of mammals and has done a lot of work with ground squirrels and so forth, but we'll come back to their story here. So yeah, Jackson is a myriapodologist. He's doing a lot of work in the western part of the state primarily, but he also then bleeds into Tennessee and Kentucky and North Carolina. That's where in these mountainous areas you have species that occur on mountaintops and nowhere else, and so they become, these mountaintops become what we call islands in the sky. They have geographic isolation, so they can't mate with other members of their type up there, and you get this isolated population that eventually evolve into new species. The same thing goes for all the valleys that we have. I'm going to hang it up, but I found this really cool relief map of Virginia. You know those three-dimensional maps, right? And it's not huge, but it is so cool. I want to hang it somewhere in a nice public area in hopes that some other people will be inspired by it. Especially when you look at the western half of the state, the relief of our state and the isolated habitats that we have really drive a lot of the work that these people do. It's really sort of an amazing thing. And I just wanted to point out, Jackson refuses to do work in the museum unless he has dramatic lighting. I just wanted to make sure. All right. So Nancy, she has a really kind of cool history. She is the longest tenured employee at the museum right now, and she is still going really strong with her research, particularly in tree squirrels. But I just wanted to share with you, this is research that was done over a decade ago, but it is a really neat story. She worked with people doing conservation of shorebirds. In the eastern shore, a lot of shorebirds will nest on our barrier islands. Now, the great thing about that is that you're kind of isolated from other things, stressors, predators and stuff, unless the predators can actually get to the islands. And one of the problems is that somehow or another raccoons were making their way across channels over to these barrier islands, and they were a predator hazard for the nests. So they would either eat the eggs or the young. And so it's fine and good. You can have a predator control program and trap or hunt the predators out. But what Nancy did, she was using very precise molecular methods to identify specific molecular, or I should say genetic specialty populations on the mainland, and then identify who was making it over to the barrier islands so we can better understand the source of these predators and try to keep the populations low there, so that way there would be less pressure of them crossing over the barrier islands. A really creative use of molecular methods. And so she's been using molecular methods, using the old-timey stuff that we used to call gel electrophoresis, which I think a lot of that stuff was wrong back then, but hey, that's just me. More modern stuff that we use doing genetic sequencing is a much more precise tool, and it's thanks to Nancy that we got started in that tradition. Okay, here's another quiz time. What kind of, it is not a plant, what kind of animal am I looking at here? And just so you know, and I've got about a half hour, not less than a half hour left of my talk, but I will not proceed until I get at least one guess.
A seahorse.
A seahorse. All right, well, I can see the shape there, Bob, but not quite, but it is an animal. These are called moss animals or bryozoans, right? So they look mossy, but they're actually colonial animals. And so let me introduce Dr. Judith Winston. She's curator emerita, retired back around 2012 or thereabouts, maybe 2013. But she's a world famous bryozoologist. This is a group of animals that it's hard to get people to get excited about, right? They kind of look like just encrusting plants. Crud is what they look like. And they grow mainly in salt water, and they'll grow on rocks and other hard substances, logs, woody material. They'll grow on boats. There are a few freshwater species. But she is a known world authority, and the diversity of these things is extremely high, and their biology is amazing. They are colonial organisms that kind of feed almost like sea anemones, right? But they're not sea anemones. This is, there on the left, this is a scanning electron micrograph, which Judy had a lot of expertise in. That's not an easy tool. You can't just go to the store, buy a scanning electron microscope, plug it in, and start getting beautiful images like this. There's a lot of technique, a lot of skill that goes into it. And these are individuals within a colony of bryozoans. And so she described hundreds of species up and down the east coast of the United States, from Maine down to Florida into the Gulf Coast and in other parts of the world as well. So she really has a legacy. Now, I'm going to go back up here. So there's the moss animals, right? They're really attractive, charismatic megafauna, right? Not hardly, they're kind of more akin to crud. I just want to say something I'm very proud of. The governor back in 2012 had asked every agency head to submit some write-up on an amazing staffer and the work that they did. And I'm like, well, I really admire her, and no one really gives moss animals a lot of credit. So I'm going to try to write a page. That's all I was given, a page on describing what a moss animal is to get people excited about it and get Judy an award. Well, she didn't get it, right? You know, somebody from VDOT or something got it. Right, so that was all fine and good. But I actually got contact and they said, we love this story, this is so cool, I'm sorry we can't give her the award, but can we put it in the governor's newsletter? I said, sure, right? So anyway, I was very proud that I was able to get, you know, Judy some recognition, and that wasn't easy. You know, writing about moss animals, I can't even remember what I wrote, but I must have wrote something okay, you know, because it did work out. So we talked about Nick already, so that's Nick over there on the left, but we'll talk a little bit more about him. Triassic reptiles. That was his big thing, so we talked about that gliding lizard and so forth. But he did Triassic reptiles all over the place. And and this is a common story, there are several people, since I've been in the museum, have done this. They got recruited to go on to really plum positions, and Nick was one of them. He's currently the Keeper of Natural Sciences at the National Museums in Scotland. So when I was a curator, I thought it'd be funny if I got to go work in Europe, and last name Kieper, and be a keeper, never mind. Anyway, so he's doing amazing things over in Scotland right now, still has a relationship with the Virginia Museum of Natural History. And I put in the Cenozoic mammal. Cenozoic, you know, we're talking stuff that's about 9 to 14 or a little bit more, maybe 17 million years ago. So it's relatively recent in evolutionary times, but he did work on mammals in our coastal plain, and we can talk about Carmel Church. So if you go to the museum and you go to our Carmel Church exhibit, that's what you're going to see. This is Nick out in the field. This is not Carmel Church. I'm not sure where that is. It's just I don't know. I always like to see curators relaxing out in the field in exotic places. So, but the Cenozoic mammal tradition that Nick started was picked up by Dr. Alton Dooley, better known as Butch. Butch was our associate curator of vertebrate paleontology, and when you go into the museum, and you go into the Hall of Ancient Life and you have that whale swimming down from the ceiling, he described that. That was a species that was new to science when it was found. And the way it was found, there was a geology field trip, and Nick was there and Butch was there, and some guys saw some whale vertebrae eroding out of the hillside of this quarry in Carmel Church, Virginia, and no one paid any attention, but Butch did. He went back and excavated it. It turned out it's this fabulous new species. He's another guy, did really great things at the museum, grew the collections, and he's currently executive director at the Museum of the West. So he got plucked for a plum position as well. So, you know, that's something we can be proud of here in Martinsville, that we get these people, they work at the Natural History Museum and then get recruited to go to, you know, kind of, I don't want to say greener pastures, not at all, right? But I will say that they are just exciting positions to grow someone's career. And here's Butch here looking all happy with a giant beaver skull. Who wouldn't be? All right, so another thing that happened during Butch's time, you might recognize the guy in the middle. Does anyone know the guy in the middle? Jim Beard, yeah, our curator emeritus of earth sciences. We'll get back to him. And that's Tim Getty. He's my predecessor at the museum. Now, I saw this picture. Does anyone know what this structure is that's in front of them? Do you recognize it from the museum? Bob and Dennis, I know you guys will know it. Callie knows what it is. Mervyn knows what it is. How about anybody else? My friend Rocky Rockwell, he used to be with the Army Corps of Engineers in Philpott Dam, he called it a stromboli, right? But it's actually, its correct term is stromatolite, right? Stromatolite is a petrified algal mass, and it's actually the biggest one that's ever been found, the biggest intact cap to a petrified algal mass. It was found up at the Bedford Quarry. And so when I was applying for my job, the museum kindly sent me a bunch of information, big stack of stuff to read, newsletters and annual reports, all these things. And I remember going through this, I was like, wow, they found a cool stromatolite. And they were talking about how big it was and stuff. And I see these three guys standing next to it, and I'm like, it's not that big. I mean, and then I finally saw it in person, and it's huge. But then I met these three guys, and they're both, you know, hey guy, you know, I mean, they're a lot bigger than me. So these are three really big men, and they kind of threw off my perspective here, but that is a record breaker of a stromatolite cap, and that was something that came in during Butch and Jim's tenure at the museum. So during Butch's time, he also recruited this guy. This is Ray Bowden, right? So he's another guy that got plucked. Like everybody who touches a fossil at the museum gets plucked away to go somewhere else. Somebody threw well, not somebody, I know who it was, the Dayton Museum of Natural History threw a bunch of money at him that I couldn't match. And they brought his talents over. He was an ace preparator, but also a molding and casting expert. If you go into the museum and you see our mosasaur overhead, or a mosasaur display up in the fossil overlook, or you look at our direwolf, our saber-toothed cat, the bovid, the giant beavers, the baby mastodon, the list goes on. He took the actual fossils and made exact replicas of them for exhibit, and they're masterful, you know, and so that's what they're having him do. They're doing a whole renovation of their main fossil hall at the Dayton Museum of Natural History, and they brought him on special just to help them with that process, and that was a good move on their part. So, and it continues. Does anyone remember this guy from not that long ago? Tan and skinny, dynamic. Alex Hastings, right? So Alex Hastings, after Butch went to the Museum of the West, Alex came on board as our curator of paleontology. And here he is out in the West photographing some of his bits there that he found out in the field, right? Here he is with a fossil snout of a freshwater crocodile that was found up by, where's Fossil Beach at? Westmoreland State Park, found in the vicinity of Westmoreland State Park. And so there's many other parts to this particular specimen. But Alex came to us, he was already kind of famous. He was one of the many on the team that discovered the world's biggest fossil snake. It was the length of a school bus. It was known as Titanoboa, so he was on that expedition down in South America. He went on from there after his Ph.D. at the University of Florida, at the Florida Museum of Natural History. He went on to a research institution in Germany where he spent 2 years studying fossil reptiles. Came to us for a few years and got plucked, and he's currently the Fitzpatrick Chair of Vertebrate Paleontology at the Science Museum of Minnesota. Now that's what I kind of question. Who would want to move to Minnesota? Oh my God, right? They talk funny, you know, food's terrible. No, I'm kidding. I love Minnesota. I've been there a number of times, right? But boy, it's snowy. I think they have snow today. So even though Virginia was saying this is a cold, blustery day, it sure beats Minnesota. Anyway, Alex was another person who came on board, did great stuff, and went elsewhere, but he also grew the collection and our reputation very nicely. Sticking with that paleontology theme, that's Lucy Tretto. She's one of our research technicians. Now, she's got a special tie here because she came and worked for us. She was on soft money, grant money, and so she was really good, and so we found every way possible to keep her on board. It was like, Lucy, I got 3 more months for you, right? Oh, we got another grant. I got another 6 months for you. We just kept her going, and she stuck with it. And to make a little extra money on the side, as we're paying her a pittance, she actually did a little bit of, kind of burning the midnight oil. She was moonlighting over here, and so a lot of the exhibit panels that are printed downstairs in the exhibit gallery here at the courthouse, she designed those and had them printed. So, like I said, we were trying everything that we could do, but she is now full-time permanent at the museum. She persevered till we could get the funding to bring her on board. And so she is busy running the day-to-day of the lab, training volunteers and students, as well as participating in field work. And the collection just grew in a special way, and you probably heard about this, but these are bits here of the cave cat. Her nickname is Petra, right? And we'll talk more about Dr. Pritchard there on the left, but he's overseeing the preparation of that. Petra is an animal that was found out by Big Stone Gap by cavers. So they were mapping a cave on private property and stumbled across Petra. And Adam is the person who's technically overseeing it, but Lucy's doing the vast majority of the work. Of course, when I ask him to send me a picture, he sends me this. I'm like, Adam, I can't see who it is. It could be me for all they know, right? So anyway, so here is Adam out near Devil's Bathtub, dodging copperheads and rattlesnakes. But I know he found some interesting shale areas out there that have fossils of interest. But he's relatively new. He's been around for a little over a couple of years now. And again, growing the collection very nicely and so forth. This Petra that we talked about here, this is going to be a really amazing animal. So from snout to vent, we're talking about 4.5 feet long, so it's a good size cat. We're not sure of the age, right? We have the tail here, and about the only thing that's missing are a couple of bones from the tip of the tail, and maybe a toe bone is missing, right? So it's going to be very, very complete. Now, since it was found in a cave, what's covering all the bones, what's making it look so kind of chunky here? What do you think? Say it again? There probably is bat guano in there. There is mud, it is wet, and there's probably guano for sure, because we know there's bats in there. but the stuff that our paleontologists this day are still working to get off the bones, what do you think that would be? Calcium carbonate, that's right. Same thing making stalactites and stalagmites is what's coating these bones. And the problem is that it's tightly adhering, so it is taking forever. Where we thought we'd be done by now, we're only about 50% through, so we need to be really careful. They took the time to take it to the hospital to get an MRI on it, and that MRI provides them with a map to show how far to go with their tools before they hit bone, right? And so they're being extremely careful with this. So we have big plans in the future. We're going to create an exhibit on her. We're going to do 3D scans of all the bones. We've already done 3D scans of some of the bones. But the idea is to continuously do that and to create a really nice reconstruction of this animal. It'll be a very special project for us. Sticking with fossils, I don't know if you guys remember this guy, but Dr. Locke Ward, better known as Buck, he was our field trip master. He was already retired when I got here, but he had spent 30 years at the museum, working in places like you see here on the Potomac River, right? So he would take these boats and these field trippers and stuff, and some of the brave ones would go up the side of the cliff, right? And they would, he focused his time and attention on the invertebrates of the coastal plain. So he worked primarily with shells. So does anyone know what the fossil, the state fossil is? What kind of animal, even if you don't remember the name, what kind of animal is it?
It's a scallop.
It's a scallop, that's right. It's called Chesapecten, which is an extinct genus, and it's Jeffersonius for obvious reasons, right? So it was named in honor of Jefferson. Well, he also, during his career, found many other species of Chesapecten in different aged sediments. Chesapecten, if I remember right, don't quote me on this, I think it's something in the middle. I think it's about 4.5 million years old, and there are other layers whereby you have different species of Chesapecten and newer layers that have other species. So that's just one example of the work that he did, but he collected massive amounts of fossils from the coastal plain, like areas here off the Potomac River. Okay. We already introduced Jim. Here's Jim back at the old building. This is probably a members behind the scenes night would be my guess here, right? And there's Jim over there. Jim has, he did a lot of work out in the open ocean, sailing around on boats, and they used modified oil drilling rigs to punch holes in the bottom of the ocean to get cores. And he did a lot of work that described the formation of the tectonic plates underneath the oceans. That wasn't all that he did. I forget what slide's next. Yeah, that's good. But he also got involved in some controversy, right? Who remembers what Coles Hill is and what it represents? What do you guys think? What's the big word there?
Uranium.
Yeah, remember the uranium controversy from a decade ago? Right? That kind of centered here. So I'll kind of spill the beans here. I think it's far enough in the past I'm allowed to talk about it. But Jim had an opinion. So Coles Hill here, as you see on the map, it's just to the east of Chatham. It's all on private property, but there are restrictions on mining uranium. By chance, we have all the rock cores for Pittsylvania County. And so Virginia Uranium, a company proposing to mine it, basically paid a bench fee for 3 years to gain access to our collection so they could figure out the extent of this uranium deposit and what its commercial value is. So they based their business plan on that. And our longstanding policy, and it still holds true today, if you're an academic doing work for the good of the world, you get access to our collections for free. If you are a company looking to develop a product or a process that's going to make money, you have to pay a bench fee. And they paid handsomely to gain access to these rock cores. Unfortunately, some people have more of a conservation mind thought we were in cahoots with them and supporting the idea of mining uranium. We're a state agency. It is the governor's position, or it's the governor's job to come up with a position, and we follow that. I cannot say, yes, you can do it, or no, you can't do it. I'm not regulatory, right? So we don't do that. But people thought that we were letting them in because we were saying, yes, let's mine it. That's not true. And so Jim kind of did, it was what it was. He, as a private citizen, which he's allowed to do, and he signed it, Jim Beard, blah, 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 Dale Avenue, Martinsville. He wrote a letter to the editor of the Martinsville Bulletin and said, it's my expert opinion that mining uranium can be done safely. Well, the Bulletin didn't do it right, and they put down Jim Beard, Virginia Museum of Natural History, and oh my God, right? So this became a real thing for us that we had to manage quite a bit. But in the end, it all worked out. The governor punted. Nothing really happened. And in fact, there was a lot learned geologically about Coles Hill, and about the formation of uranium deposits. So from an academic standpoint, there was a lot of great stuff done. On the other hand, it kind of turned into a bit of a political mess. So I only showed this picture. Does anyone have any idea where this is? I came across this picture, it's so interesting. Here's Jim right here. I emailed, I was like, Jim, where is this? And he says he can't remember. He says some kind of Badlands, maybe somewhere near Richmond, right? And so that's Buck Ward, that's Richard Hoffman. I can't tell who this person is, right? But it looks incredible. I mean, does anybody have any idea? I mean, I spent a grand total of 5 minutes looking on Google Earth, trying to find some big, I just imagine that being like brown, spot on the Earth, but I couldn't really come across anything. So this is a bit of a mystery. So put your thinking caps on. All right, you are all familiar with the name Gravely here in Henry County. So Richard Gravely is a famous regional archaeologist who did a lot of excavations here and so forth. He's kind of a key reason the museum is here. One of the original arguments was that Tennessee and North Carolina and Washington, D.C. and Maryland are sending scientists into the Commonwealth, gathering our biological, our geological, our paleontological, and our archaeological treasures and bringing them to museums in other states. And in Tennessee, North Carolina, Washington, D.C., Maryland, that's where a lot of the Commonwealth's treasures reside, right? So the idea was, and this is what happens, so the Gravely material is in North Carolina. It is not in a Virginia museum. The Gravely material is in a couple of museums in North Carolina. As such, that was one of the original arguments back in the 80s. Let's start a natural history museum because it's paleoprivacy, archaeopiracy, biopiracy, geopiracy, right? And they're true. These things, they were right. These items should be staying here within the Commonwealth. So here's one of Richard's field sites and a student doing an excavation and so forth. And we continued very early on. This was our first archaeologist. I never met her, Sandra Olson. She's currently a research affiliate of archaeology at the University of Kansas, retired at this point, but had a long, illustrious career. A lot of you remember Dr. Elizabeth Moore. She served on the board here, the review board, the architectural review board, right, and so forth. Her thing is zooarchaeology, looking at animal remains at native Virginia sites and telling a lot about those sites. And so what really amazed me was one of her students was working on a little fragment of something. I was like, what are you working on? She said, this is a part of a skull of a loon. And I was like, well, how do you know this is a loon? She says, look, there's a little pore in here, and this is where it excretes salt from marine environments. So like, oh my God, how can you tell? And it's amazing. It's an amazing amount of talent that goes into that. She really did great things. She left to be got kind of plucked away from us. She is the state archaeologist. This is Dr. Hayden Bassett, her successor. I did give him an office, right? We don't keep him in the parking lot, right? But he's working right here with some satellite technology and needed line of sight. We did mount an antenna on the top of the museum for him. He started the VMNH Cultural Heritage Monitoring Lab. I'm not going to talk about that today. Maybe afterwards we can have some one-on-one if you want to hear what's going on there, but maybe he would be a great example of a talk to give here at the Historical Society. All right. And here's his team here. Right, these are folks from everywhere. This is his wife, Maddie, right? So she works at the Natural History Museum as well. So in fact, here she is here. She is finishing her Ph.D. on medieval trade networks in the Horn of Africa, but she brings in a whole new skill set to our archaeology program. So we're very lucky to have Hayden and Maddie simultaneously succeeding Elizabeth Moore in her program. Here's some of the artifacts that she looked at from the Horn of Africa. These are chalcedony flakes. The one flake there on the left is probably produced during stone tool manufacture, and then this is a nodule, which would have been the original bit that they would have hammered to make these portions of their tools and so forth. Dr. Cal Ivanov, he's been around for a while now, 7 years or so. He does research on the ants of Virginia, as well as isopods and other soil biota. I've got a quote from him here. I've always been fascinated by the natural world and the little things that make it go around. For me, a career in science was a natural progression from a childhood dream. I hope you begin to understand that's the enthusiasm that we have going on over there on Starling Avenue. And so these are the various kinds of creatures that he works with. What's this? Here, anyone want to do an ID?
That's a hissing cockroach.
Not a hissing cockroach, same shape.
Roly-poly.
Roly-poly, right? In fact, yes, the roly-poly or sow-bug or whatever. In fact, this has the genus name Armadillidium, like armadillo. It can close up into a circle. This is a pseudoscorpion, don't worry, they don't bite, right? And the ants that he studies. So he's really studying something that's really important. As we kind of wind up my talk here, I will get to Dr. Terry Schwerner. I have no idea who this guy is. I don't really know what happened to him. He ended up in academia, but he was our first herpetologist for about a year and a half. I don't have any record of him coming on board or why he stayed such a short period of time, right? I wanted to give a tip of the hat to Jason Gibson. I couldn't find a picture of him, but he's one of our research associates. He's faculty at Patrick and Henry Community College, and here's some images from his work on genetic variability in frogs and toads. But we now have Dr. Ariana Kuhn. She's brand new, months in, right? So she just got started. She did work prior in Canada and Madagascar, but she's going to be working out in the western part of the state, looking at salamanders, and again, kind of going back to that tradition that Richard Hoffman started, and that Jackson Means continues with working in that area. She's going to work in that area too, looking at reptiles and amphibians. So we're really excited about what she's going to bring. She also recruited Marshall Boyd. He's brand new out of school. He's got expertise in collections organization and database management, so he's going to be helping her quite a bit. So we've got some really, really good young talent going on over there. And we also do citizen science, right? So yeah, there's me right there. I still do science, right? So we do, this is a picture of us from the Christmas bird count, right? So you can all get involved in that. We do citizen science over at the museum. In fact, Callie and I, we're going down to the Parchment Farm in Guilford, North Carolina, where we are going to look for a rare bird that's been reported down there. It's a bird normally only from the western part of the United States. It's been hanging out down there at Guilford Courthouse. So we do citizen science and enter our observations online and so forth. So Christmas bird count, since we've been doing it every year since I've been here. And there are many other people who work at the museum, including master naturalists. I know we got a couple of master naturalists. If you're a master naturalist, raise your hand, right? I think we got a couple of 3, 4 of you, right? So that's awesome, right? Master naturalists do a lot of good in the community as well as good citizen science. But there are other research associates and visitors and board members and stuff that have done great things. I wish I had a chance to talk about all of them. But I'll go ahead and end it off there, and I hope you can begin to see that this is just kind of my world in a nutshell. Science and its origins here in Martinsville, Henry County. Once we begin to paint the full picture, I hope you begin to see its breadth in our community. So I'll go ahead and take a couple of 3 quick questions, but I'll stick around for any other questions that you may want to have one-on-one. So do we have any questions? All right, we'll start over here on the right, my right.
Is there a related facility in Waynesboro, and if so, how does it work with this?
So the question has to do with our goal of establishing a branch of our museum up in Waynesboro by the south entrance to the Shenandoah National Park. That is going to be exhibits only, right? So, and an education program as well, so we'll have classrooms. But that's something we're going through the state process of designing right now. We're in the detailed design process, and we're in the 6-year capital layout for the state, and that's a 6-year plan, and we're in phase 1, so we should be getting the construction funds within the next year or 2. As long as all stays good. So that's going to broaden our outreach, but it's not really going to change our science. It will have a small research lab, which if we have scientists or visiting scientists who have aspirations to do work more up in the Shenandoah Valley or Shenandoah National Park, we'll have a toehold from with which to work. But the headquarters for natural history will always be on Starling Avenue. So Mervyn, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think it's interesting for everybody to know, realize what a challenge it was and how lucky it was for all the towns and all the communities in the state of Virginia to put Martinsville as Virginia Museum of Natural History. That was a tremendous break and tremendous luck on their part.
And tremendously lucky for me, right? So, so yeah, you're 100% right. There were so many citizens that stepped up and kept this museum in the community. So if you go to Chamber After Hours, which I think it's in 2 Thursdays, so not this coming Thursday, but the following Thursday, we're hosting Chamber After Hours at the Natural History Museum. And one of the things, and staff don't even know about this yet, I just concocted this morning, we're going to be talking, since it's the Chamber, we're going to be putting up kind of a small presentation that people can enjoy that talk about our economic impact on the area through tourism and so forth. So we're going to be putting that together. So come by and kind of get a little different perspective on what, not just us, but the Historical Society, Fahey, Bassett Historical Society, Piedmont Arts, what they all bring to the community from the standpoint of economic stability. I'll take one more question if anyone has any. Again, I'll stick around. By the way, over there on the corner, our latest issue of Virginia Explorer is out, so please feel free to grab one. It kind of talks about the origins of the term natural history and the first books written on natural history almost 2,000 years ago. And 2023 represents 2,000 years since the birth of Pliny the Elder, who was the author of the first books on natural history. So, Mervyn, yes?
There's a new disease out called bird mania. I don't know, you may have that.
I hear it's a mental disease. Thank you, Mervyn. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share all this today, and I'm going to try to continuously update this, and I'll even provide a copy for safekeeping over in the Historical Society here, so we have all these images and stories, protected, and not just in a jumble over natural history. So anyway, thank you again.